Hello, Brovs. We're back with Triad, a novel of the supernatural by Mary Leader. Chapter 4. Dinner and a show with Alan that night, some friend's anniversary. Party at the club the next evening, church Sunday morning, and a cookout at the home of Alan's partner Sunday afternoon rescued me from thinking, and life reasserted itself so that my memory of Friday afternoon's nightmare began to fade. By Monday morning, I was able to face Alan's departure with at least a surface equanimity. Surely it had all been a dream, a kind of hallucination brought on by my overwrought imagination and built up by guilt feelings too long repressed. Well, now I had faced myself with it, and I could view it with adult detachment, I thought. After all, I hadn't intended to kill Rhiannon, no matter how much I disliked her. It wasn't my fault that the handle was rusted, nor did I know that it was. Perhaps, I told myself, getting the whole thing out in the open once more was a sort of self-induced therapy, as though I were functioning as my own psychiatrist. Now it was up to me to accept the truth and go on from there. If only there were some avenue of redress open to me, it would be so much easier. But what? Confession? To whom? The wrong parties were all dead. Alan? What good would that do? He had no part in this. Why burden him? Why run the danger of eroding his trust in me? I went into my study, lined floor to ceiling with the books that had accumulated over the years. Books are a necessity to me, but they are addictive, and I must regulate their dosage, for I could easily read my whole life away. Plumping myself down on the chaise lounge by the window, I picked up the novel that Wes had sent and began to read. But again, it failed to hold my attention. Just another tedious attempt to reproduce life in the jet set. I put the book down, aware I had been reading without my mental tape recorder turned on. I hadn't the slightest idea of what had gone on in the last 3 pages. I was, in fact, listening to the house. Any house will talk to you if you'll let it, but old houses babble incessantly, which is not surprising. Did that floorboard creak from dryness or from a weightless step? Is that a mouse scuttling between the walls or fingers running over the keyboard of studs? Is it the wind that moans in the chimneys and around the gables and parapets on a windless day, or is it? The nostalgic glow that had first assailed me began to chill as the sensation of a presence near me crept down the back of my neck and arms and into the tips of my fingers, then down my spine to my toes. I turned around, nothing, but the feeling persisted so strongly that the breath caught in my throat, and I could stand it no longer. I fled outside and into the wood, which ranges on either side of the ravine north of our house. It was to the split in the lip of the bluff that I often retreated to watch and listen to the things of nature and supernature spilling forth. Today my hurrying feet scattered dry leaves left over from winter. Ferns and seedling trees brushed at my legs. A cold black nose nuzzled my hand momentarily. Then Lance was off in futile pursuit of a squirrel flashing across his path. The tiny animal scrambled up the trunk of an old oak just out of the dog's reach, its cheeks stuffed with last fall's acorns. Somewhere in the wood, a flicker was busy with his pneumatic drill. Ants were scurrying up and down the trunk of a maple, going to and from their herds of aphid cows, and in a branch high above me a goldfinch concluded an area and darted away. A flash of lemon against the steep blue dike of the lake beyond. By the time I reached the high outcropping of rock that jutted out toward the lake, the tension and fear had drained out of me, and I sat down, my back against the smooth-barked beach. In most places, the bluff sloped sharply, but not precipitously, toward the lake. This promontory, however, had resisted the wear of time and was a thin sliver of high peninsula above the shore, like the overhanging prow of a ship. The underslung face of the cliff, a sheer drop 200 feet. To the water below, where docile waves fondled protruding boulders with mermaid hands. The north side of the rock overlooked the ravine, and here the incline was more gradual, with layers of limestone laid bare at the top and a heavy coating of rich, moist earth farther down. The topmost branches of a tree that was rooted in the slope struck out above the crag where I sat. It always looked as if it were trying to climb on deck, espaliered as it was against the rock. It was a tree I couldn't identify, although its catkins resembled those of a birch, but its leaves were saw-toothed like elm leaves. I leaned over and patted one of its branches. "One day, old fella," I encouraged it, "you'll make it. You'll grow and grow like Jack's beanstalk, and this old rock you've been trying to climb all these years will be nothing but a pebble to you." The tree nodded as the branch rebounded from my grasp. Just then Lance burst from the wood and collapsed beside me, thrusting his big head into my lap and grunting blissfully as I stroked his soft fur. It was warm for a spring day, and the continual wash of the waves, like a giant pulse, crept into my consciousness and gradually lulled me to sleep. The next thing I remembered was waking up in my own bed to another day. Lance was curled up on Alan's bed. I shooed him off, got up, and started to dress as usual. It took several minutes for me to become alert enough to realize that my last waking memory was of leaning against the beech trunk, fondling Lance's long ears, and drowsily watching a white sail skim along the line, dividing the sky from the darker blue of the lake. What had happened between then and now? As I reached in back to zip up my blouse, I was surprised to find how sore my muscles were again, especially in my right arm. What had I been doing? Maybe some coffee would wake me up, and then I'd remember. I looked around the kitchen in dismay. Was it the bright morning light, or had some chemical in the pink paint caused it to turn a bright orange? Yes, that must be it. And how I hated orange, particularly here next to the pink in the wallpaper. Fuming, I picked up the phone and called the hardware store. "Mr. Wolf," I blurted out when I heard his voice, "that paint you sold me appears to be unstable. It was a beautiful pink when I first applied it, but it suddenly turned orange." "But, Mrs. Erickson," he answered, "I don't understand. You came in yesterday and bought some orange paint, remember? You even told me the pink didn't look good." Luckily, there were customers chattering in the background. I don't remember what I said. Whatever it was, I'm sure it didn't make sense. Nothing could have in a situation like that. The library book and the review, and now orange paint, and along with them, the incident in the ballroom. I wished I could believe they were unrelated, or that there was a rational explanation, like somebody pulling a colossal practical joke on me that had triggered my imagination and jogged my memory. "Branwyn, don't be ridiculous. Who would do such a thing, even if they could?" But there had to be an explanation. Does there? Hypnosis, that would explain everything. But who? Mrs. Lemke? I laughed out loud. "Alan." "Yes, what about Alan? Alan thinks hypnotism is sideshow stuff. You know that. Besides, how could he possibly know about Rhiannon? Maybe I talked in my sleep. To that extent? Absurd. There was another possibility. Witchcraft? In this day and age? Stop it, Branwyn. You're getting morbid." I started toward the garage where the trash barrel was kept. All the way out, I knew what I'd find, and did. 3 empty cans marked orange. What was I to do? What would Alan think? I could just imagine Romy Wolf's thoughts about now. I wonder if Miss Erickson is a secret drinker. If that story got out, along with the one about the library card, being a comparative newcomer to the town, not being a native, that is, I'd be all the more suspect. I just couldn't face Mr. Wolf to buy more paint. Besides, the orange was such a violent shade, I was afraid it might bleed through an overlayer of pink. I'd have to call in professional help. I was lucky. There was a painter available for the next day, which was Wednesday, so that by Thursday, which was Mrs. Lemke's day, and also when Alan was due home, the kitchen would be pink again, and there'd be no need for embarrassing explanations. I always paid the bills, so Alan probably wouldn't even notice. But what about me? Was this what happened in nervous breakdowns, or worse, schizophrenia? Oh no, not me. Not even people I know. Just nameless, faceless thousands who have nothing to do with me. Like the people I'd seen in the state mental institutions when I did a series of stories on them, all I could remember was their eyes that looked beyond, not at you, Great, luminous, withdrawn eyes, Picasso eyes in the snake pit. Don't be melodramatic. Snake pits are a thing of the past. But Alan mustn't know. How long could things like this go on without his finding out? What would he do? They say people who fear they are going mad don't. I must hang on to that. I must fight this thing within me. If it is within me, maybe there's some perfectly natural explanation, or supernatural. So I had come back to that. Well, what about it? Plenty of rational, enlightened people have believed in England's ghosts. Miss Lucinda was jilted by her lover. Mightn't her bitterness have left a pall of evil over the place? Or perhaps she lingered here, resenting the intrusion of strangers. The painter arrived at 8:30 the next morning by the kitchen clock. He was so tall I wondered if he had Watusi blood in him, for with his finely chiseled patrician features, he might have stepped out of an Egyptian tomb painting. I could picture him as a tribal king seated on his chair of kneeling humans, a leopard skin about his loins, a white feathered headdress cresting his head, and slaves diligently fanning him with palm leaves. You're so very tall, I remarked as, standing on the floor, he deftly drew his brush across the top of one of the cabinets. Did you ever think of going out for basketball? He gave a wry grin. Yes, ma'am, he said, pausing to dip his brush. I was in pro basketball as a rookie, but I wrecked my knee and it never did heal right. So here I am. What a shame. Sure is. I needed that money to finance myself through a doctorate in biochemistry. Now I guess it's going to take a little longer, especially since I'm married. Do you have any children? Yes'm, a little boy. He'll be a year old in August. I thought of the box of toys in the half closet. There were even some that Timmy had never used. Like the football Alan bought him. I'd never been able to part with them, but what was the use of their gathering dust? I turned to speak to the painter again, noticing as I did so that it wasn't even 9 o'clock yet, and he was well into the first bank of cabinets. I have some. The clock caught my gaze again. 7:30. Impossible. A clock can't go backwards. Then I realized that the painter was gone, and so were his ladder and equipment, and I was standing in the kitchen quite alone. Lights were burning, and it was dark outside. The cabinets gleamed pink again. Through the open door, I could see that the butler's pantry had been finished too. My checkbook lay open on the table. I picked it up and thumbed the pages to the last stub. Yes, I had written a check for the paint contractor, although I scarcely recognized my own handwriting. Then I remembered the toys. They were still in the closet. Too bad. Where had the day gone? In fact, what day was it? How could I be sure that only 11 hours had passed? The newspaper, that would tell me. As I headed out the back door toward the road, Lance rose up from the step outside where he had been lying. Good boy, he hadn't run away, but he must be hungry. At the paper box, I hurriedly unfolded the paper and turned my flashlight on it. Yes, it was Wednesday's edition, I saw with relief. But what about the painter? Had he noticed anything different about me? Apparently, I had functioned well enough to write him a check in the correct amount. But this time, the blackout had come when I was wide awake and talking to someone. Lance nudged me. I handed him the paper, but I shivered as I did so. How could I trust myself anywhere? Anywhere. All right, brubs. That's the end of chapter 4. And that's all for that. Goodbye, bruvs. Good boy.